Greetings, this is Dr. Jess Armine, and in association with BANT, I am very honored to present Epigenetics and Functional Testing, a Practical Approach. I'd like to acknowledge Dr. Ben Lynch for the use of his pathway planners, and also put a quick plug in for his book, Dirty Genes. Dirty Genes is made for lay people and is a good way to understand epigenetics and what to do with your genes that are quote unquote dirty. It is worth a read, people, seriously. So we're going to do this in about 60 minutes, so I suggest you put on your seatbelts because I am originally from Brooklyn, New York, even though I live in Massachusetts at the moment, and I talk rather quickly. If you hear noisy birds in the background, it's because they know I'm recording and they're out there making noise. Okay. So this is what we're going to do today. We're going to cover some of the major biochemical pathways, some of the tests that would indicate the expression of genetic polymorphisms. And by the way, I use the word polymorphism, SNP, alleles. SNP means single nucleotide polymorphism. I tend to use these things interchangeably. They basically all mean the same thing. And I'd like to share with you how to view the history in combination with the genetic information to determine which test to perform. What I'm not going to do today is go through each and every gene and all their variants, go through the quote-unquote fast or slow genes, or how to determine treatment plans based only on the SNPs. By the way, that is not the way to determine a treatment plan. And those programs that are out there that say you have this polymorphism, give the person that particular product, are, shall I politely say, inaccurate. First things first, concerning testing. Be careful what tests you order. You might have to interpret them. There's a difference, people. The basic difference between reading and interpretation is as follows. If you just read a test, when I say you, I don't mean you individually, I mean anybody. When you read a test, often you're just taking the biomarker at face value without its relationship to other biomarkers or evidence of clinical expression. Also, people tend to treat each biomarker as if it's independent, so you end up with an untenable treatment plan. Somebody is taking 20, 30, 40 products, and let's face it, the more and more and more you give somebody to do, the less and less and less they will eventually do. It's been my experience that the person who treats each biomarker independently has their understanding of the biomarkers based on the organization who has taught them. Generally speaking, if you go to various seminars, you have to be careful and be discerning as to what seminars you go to. So if you go to a seminar that is given by a particular company, very often they want you to use their products. Well, there's nothing really wrong with that, except many companies will give you protocols and teach you how to read biomarkers with an eye towards we want you to use our products. That's called inherent bias, and you should be discerning about that. Okay, I'm not saying for you not to go, but I'm saying for you to be discerning. Okay, interpreting biomarkers, on the other hand, is considering them in groups based on systems, considering the biomarkers in relation to evidence of clinical manifestation, utilizing biomarkers as a direction finders as to the root causes and or downstream effects. Okay, and you can utilize the biomarkers as part of a holistic approach and development of your treatment plan, and the biomarkers can also be used as an outcome measure. So you have to say to yourself, what's my intention? Why am I doing this test? What am I going to get out of it? How is it going to improve the patient's outcomes? At this point, I'd like to just say a little word on methylation. Methylation is an industry buzzword these days. When I first started doing this many years ago, nobody knew what methylation was, and the various companies out there could care less. Now all of a sudden, methylation is everything and anything, and there's products galore that are geared towards the magical word methylation. Well, methylation is an important process in the body, but let me tell you people, it's not the only process. Here is where methylation actually occurs. This is from the Roche biochemical pathways, which are available online. You can download it. It's an interactive PDF, and it'll give you every little piece of information you ever wanted. Okay, you can see that methylation, where the green arrows originate, affect other pathways. But you really should know that methylation, which is that little green arrow you're seeing now, is only part of a greater whole. If that biochemical pathway chart were on your wall, it would take the entire wall. So when someone bills themselves as a, quote, methylation practitioner, unquote, I begin to wonder, how do you treat one pathway and not the rest of the body? Polymorphisms. Let's talk about polymorphisms and what they are, okay? And they can be called SNPs for single nucleotide polymorphisms, alleles. What do they actually mean? Well, the alleles or SNPs, they're estimates of the enzyme's innate function. Remember, the gene encodes an enzyme. The genes do nothing per se except create the enzyme, and our body works by enzymatic processes. So I kind of want you to think of the enzyme's innate function. That means with nothing else going on, what is this enzyme going to do? Well, if you see on a test that it's green or normal or negative/negative, think of it as an M road. Okay, if it's heterozygote, think of it like a B road or a 4-lane highway. And that's means that it's going to give you about 60% of the enzyme's expected function. Or if it's a C road or 2-lane highway, it's going to be about 20% of the enzymatic function. And listen, people, I go to UK a lot, so I know what your C roads are like. Oh my God, those are just very thin. A little bit of traffic, everything stops. So I put it to you that if the number of lanes, do the number of lanes in the pathway really matter if there's no traffic? Instead of concentrating on the innate enzymatic function, i.e. the SNPs, we should concentrate on what slows the pathway down, and that's the traffic. Granted, a 2-lane highway will get blocked up a whole lot quicker than a 4-lane highway, a whole lot quicker than an 8-lane highway, but it's really the traffic that matters. And what is this traffic? Bacteria, heavy metals, viruses, parasites, food allergens, candida, leaky gut syndrome, so forth and so on. So if you have a lot of traffic, the pathway that you're on will get slower. It's not going to stop. It'll slow down, and you're not going to get the products you're looking for. Colloquially, this is sometimes called turning on or turning off genes. Frankly, that's an impossibility, but it is a colloquialism that you're going to run into. By the way, if you look at a pathway or you look at a genetic test and a lot of stuff is green or negative, does not necessarily mean you're good to go. You do need to ask yourself, can you put enough traffic on an M road or an 8-lane highway to slow it down? You think? Often I'm asked, can you test for individual SNPs? By the way, as I say this, what is wrong with the title statement? Well, yes and no. There are no biomarkers for the SNPs themselves. Some SNPs lead directly to measurable biomarkers. For instance, MTHFR, methylene tetrahydrofolate reductase, takes 5,10-methylene tetrahydrofolate and creates 5-methyl tetrahydrofolate, and you can measure that. But with most SNPs, you can't. The real question is, why would you want to measure the individual SNP, assuming that you could? Okay, would it help you diagnose and treat better? Think about it. How does the knowledge of epigenetics help us become better clinicians? I want you to think pathways. And by the way, what's the problem with the title statement is you can't do a biomarker type test for individual SNPs. In other words, you don't know if it's expressing or not just by looking at it. Here's a good secret for you. Knowledge of the genes, SNPs, and the pathways will give you a hint on which systems may become dysfunctional under an oxidative stress load. Sometimes the same information will give you insight into areas you didn't previously consider. And frankly, you're going to appear brilliant when you know what questions to ask. An example would be if there's SNPs in the ALDHs or the NATs, okay, you might want to ask, does the person crave sugar? And how do you feel with alcohol use? And the general answer is, when I was younger, I could drink like a fish, but now if I drink 1 or 2 drinks, I feel rubbish. Well, some of those root causes are going to be either mold or candida. Remembering that alcohol breaks down to acetaldehyde, which then breaks down into acetic acid. If you have too much acetaldehyde in the system, and that highway that we call the aldehyde pathway is all blocked up, okay, it's going to take longer for you to get rid of the acetaldehyde, which is very much like formaldehyde, and you're going to start getting really bad symptoms. The root causes of that are candida and mold, mostly candida, because candida produces acetaldehyde. And you can also work this backwards, okay? You have somebody with a lot of anger, they usually have high dopamine, okay? And you can extrapolate that's, COMT, DRD2, MAOA may be polymorphic. Addictions often lead to low serotonin, and there's usually SNPs at the DRD2. Okay, that's called the addiction gene. If you want to look that up, that's under reward deficiency syndrome, and Kenneth Blum, PhD, did the original work on that over the past 20 or 30 years. Okay, and then another historical point is somebody feels rubbish when they're drinking green juices. Well, remember, a lot of people juice because it's going to detox and make them feel better. But what if they're drinking juices, and it's usually spinach juice and kale juice and mixed in with other juices? Okay, what if they feel rubbish? What if they feel bad? Well, it kind of indicates high ammonia, and that can be the transsulfuration pathway. And also, if they're always getting ill and they have those symptoms and their urine smells like a cat's urine, very ammonia-like, that could be the arginine pathway. Okay, so if you know that, you can go to the arginine pathway and know that the 3 amino acids that may help are arginine, ornithine, and citrulline. The quintessential secret in becoming an excellent clinician is listening to your patient. He's telling you the diagnosis. Sir William Osler, one of the founding fathers of Johns Hopkins Medical Center here in the States, okay, made that statement in 1895, and it's still true today, although because of various factors, we either don't listen to our patients or don't have the time to take a good history. So I want you to look at things, especially genetically, from the 30,000-foot point of view. If you consider each gene individually, personally, I think you're courting psychosis. Okay, consider the genes in functional groups. Okay, consider the proposed enzyme functionality. Okay, so if you see something that is looks like it might not be a good pathway, and then there's an oxidative stress load on it, look at the results of that pathway and the pathology that or symptoms that might be involved. And if they all correlate, it's very, very similar to the statement, if all the dogs are barking up a tree, don't yell at the dogs, look up the tree. Okay, correlate with history and lab evidence. And this way you can make a plan that is individualized to that person's unique physiology. When you do that, you get much better results. And, when you get good results, you don't have to advertise. Your patients / clients, or whatever you want to call them, okay, whatever's politically correct these days, are going to advertise for you. Because remember, allopathic medicine generally handles the really severe things, the nasty things. But all the people that we see, we tend to get those who fall through the cracks or medicine doesn't know what to do with, okay? Part of what I'm teaching today is going to help you not only become a better clinician, but attract those patients because you're the practitioners that are going to help them. So without sounding repetitive, what should be contemplated when considering the pathways? Well, cofactors and coenzymes, the things that make the enzymes run, the factors that would decrease or downregulate enzymatic activity or upregulate enzymatic activity. And you consider the SNPs last. Considering the SNPs last, that's akin to blasphemy. I don't want to be accused of blasphemy, but hey, guess what? I have a lot of patients and they're very much all getting better. And it's the way I look at things, and I think the way we all should look at things. Dr. Ben Lynch has an application called Strategene, which takes the genetic information from 23andMe and puts it into the pathways. And he also has pathway planners, which is what came before the Strategene. So throughout this lecture, I'm going to use his information, and I did get his courteous permission to utilize it. Also, any lab tests that you see, I have the patient's permission to use. Often the patient is me, okay, but I also have anybody else. I have their verbal permission or permission by email, okay, because I don't, even though I'm not mentioning names, I don't like to throw people's information out there. So when we're looking at the gene, okay, there's substrate, which is usually above it, okay, and the gene encodes an enzyme. The curvy line are the cofactors that are needed for the enzyme to run. Anything in purple are factors that would decrease enzymatic activity, and of course anything in orange are things that would upregulate enzymatic activity. And the symbols for the M road, B road, and C road are there for you to look at. They're obviously green. Don't worry about the wild type because that gets into some technicalities that really aren't clinically significant. Okay, this is my cytochrome P450 pathway. Okay, and I know it's a little bit daunting, but we know what the cytochrome P450 pathway is. It is liver detox phase 1. Much of this, like the CYP2D6s or 2C19s or the 2C9s or the 2D6s and so forth, are really how various medications will conjugate or break down. And with the advent of pharmacogenetics, people who are being prescribed medicines are getting better results because when the studies were done with the medicines, okay, they know exactly which enzyme is utilized to get them through the liver phase 1. So if a physician is knowledgeable in pharmacogenetics, they can prescribe better. There are a few here that are more germane to our practices, and I'm going to go over them right now. I don't want to insult your intelligence. I know that you know what phase 1 and phase 2 liver detoxification is, but I do want to point out a couple of things. Okay, toxins are generally lipid soluble and they are nonpolar molecules. Okay, our phase 1 cytochrome P450 pathway takes that, turns it into a free radical, and which is a reactive oxygen species. Okay, then the reactive oxygen species is put through the conjugation pathways, sulfation, glucuronidation, glutathione conjugation, acetylation, so forth and so on, to create a polar molecule which is water soluble. By the way, that's considered alchemy, okay, to be able to take a non-polar molecule and turn it into a polar molecule, but that's how our body works. Well, I know you already know that, but the point I want to make is look at the enzymes and cofactors. Okay, riboflavin, niacin, peroxin, in other words, B2, B3, B6, B9, B12, glutathione, vitamin A, vitamin C, vitamin E, okay, coenzyme Q10. You're going to see this throughout the whole body. It makes you wonder that if we just gave the body what it needed to run the biochemical pathways, if it wouldn't just go ahead and suck it up and things would run, okay? Stuff to think about. What do you think? Okay, so you're looking at a study and you see a lot of CYP1A1s, I'm sorry, 1A2s and 1B1s. 1A2s, I want you to think mold, also estrogen. Okay, and 1B1s and also with the UGT1A1s, I want you to think estrogen dominance. These are just hints. When I said you'd look brilliant, you see a lot of 1A2 polymorphisms, and you have somebody in England, the mold capital, the mold country of the world, okay, because it's always wet over there, right? Tell me I'm wrong. Okay, and you ask about mold, and you got to question them a little bit more. You might find out a reason why that person has chronic illness, okay? And if you look at the 1B1s and the UGT1A1s, and they're all polymorphic, and of course even with the 1A2s, and the woman usually especially has very strange symptoms, and everybody thinks it's psychiatric, and you say, no. Let's look at some tests that may look at your hormones. I think we're going to find out the reason here. Again, it's a hint. So one of the tests you can do, should you be suspicious of hormone problems, is called the Dutch testing. This is a summary of it. Okay, if you go to this website, dutchtest.com, by the way, this test is available in UK, I believe, from Regeneris, from Biolab UK, maybe available elsewhere. Very easy to do. You actually urinate on these pieces of paper different times, let them dry. It's a very interesting technology. Then they can just go into the regular mail. It doesn't have to be courier. It doesn't cost the patient extra money. Okay, and you're not only going to get the summary of this, but you're going to get all the breakdowns of everything from pregnenolone on down. Plus, if you do the complete, you're going to get the adrenal hormones. If you go to this website, they have a ton of videos, training videos for physicians, training videos for lay people. It's not that hard to understand. They make it very easy, tons of explanations. It's worth doing it if you want to understand hormones and then intervene. In this particular one, you see the estradiol is quite high. The progesterone is quite low. The testosterone is quite low. Okay, that would be an obvious estrogen dominance. If you look at the daily free cortisol pattern, look at the red line, and it's almost completely below the low edge. This would be a stage 3 adrenal fatigue, even though the DHEA is on the higher side and the cortisol production is on the higher side. That has to do with when you add in the testosterone breakdown products. But if you have somebody who's wired but tired and has difficulty with PMS or PMT and so forth, this may give you a hint as to how you're going to intervene. When you're looking at the NATs or the aldehyde pathways, which are the ADHs, okay, if you have a significant amount of polymorphisms, think yeast, think candida, okay? Ask them, because remember, candida, what does it do? It produces acetaldehyde. So let's go to that. Ethanol, this is why I asked you to ask them about ethanol, through the action of alcohol dehydrogenase, and NADH, okay, produces acetaldehyde. That's 2 carbons in an aldehyde. Well, formaldehyde is 1 carbon in an aldehyde. Last time I took biochemistry, if they're that close, they're not exactly cousins, they're brother and sister. So guess what? Acetaldehyde, you might as well be just having formaldehyde in there. And of course, now through acetaldehyde dehydrogenase and NADH, you're going to create an acetate or acetic acid, which is vinegar, which is harmless, depends on how you look at it. Okay, but definitely that's where it wants to go. So if the person has a lot of acetaldehyde, one of the ways you're going to tell is that if they drink alcohol, they're going to get stuck in that aldehyde stage, okay? And they're going to have hangover symptoms or blackout symptoms, or they're just going to feel generally rubbish after a small amount of alcohol. You can extrapolate that candida is on board in a great degree because candida is creating a lot of acetaldehyde and dumping it into the system. Well, in the 1980s, people, it was like, don't feed the yeast, don't feed the yeast, don't feed the yeast. Okay, and guess what? They blamed yeast on MS. They blamed yeast on causing ME. They blamed yeast on causing almost anything. And you know something? They weren't wrong, because that amount of acetaldehyde is going to affect the nervous system. It's going to affect many different systems. Okay, we're talking about formaldehyde. Okay, basically. Remember, formaldehyde is an embalming agent. The reason it's an embalming agent is because it's such a highly oxidative thing that it stops all, all cellular function. Okay, that's how it preserves things. So just to add another carbon, you're not going too far off. So you get a lot of acetaldehyde in the system, you're going to get a lot of symptomatology, a lot of varied symptomatology. So recognizing this and asking this simple question, even if the tests for candida don't show it, it's candida. Okay? Guess what? You figured it out. I'm proud of you. PON1. If you see PON1 polymorphic, it means that the person may have difficulty breaking down organophosphates. Okay, there's a little thing about GMOs there. You can test this at Great Plains Laboratory. They do have a glyphosate profile. It's also part of the GPL tox profile, which you can see all the various toxins. Now, glyphosates are nasty things. Okay, this is Roundup, all the herbicides. They will tear up the gut. They will tear up the mitochondria. Like I said, I've been in practice a good long time, and I am seeing a lot of children, a lot of babies. I'm talking about infants with leaky gut syndrome. And it wasn't known until a little while ago that the baby foods out there were non-GMO and had glyphosates in them. Also remember, the GMO foods are made to withstand the glyphosates. So they're spraying this stuff on the foods to increase the yield, but it's getting into the water and it's getting into everything else. And I don't want to seem unseemly here, but they found glyphosates in the cotton that went into tampons, and women were getting exposed to glyphosates, okay, by doing what was normally done for a menstrual cycle. It's a universal problem, and you need to consider it. And people are getting ill earlier in life, and that's why you're beginning to see higher levels of autism. This is not the only reason, but this is what's setting the body up for more destructive activities. Okay, so if you wanted to quantify it, you would do something like the glyphosate profile. Well, as we would say in the southern part of the United States, let me learn you how to read a pathway. So let's look at the folate pathway. Okay, this is from Strategene, okay, which is also the pathway planners. And remember, the purpose of the pathway is to take your folate and turn into 5,10-methylene tetrahydrofolate. Okay, and MTHFR is not the only enzyme to consider. As simple as that. Okay. What happens is it goes through these various enzymes, becomes dihydrofolate, tetrahydrofolate before it becomes the fancy names. But look at what's necessary to run the pathways: NADPH, NADP, NAD, NAD, NAD. It's an NAD-dependent pathway. Okay, simple as that. So if you don't have enough NAD or B3 in your body, you're not going to run this pathway very well. The things in purple are things that are going to slow down: folic acid, green tea, which is the EGCG, grapefruit seed extract, which is also used for candida, so be careful. Okay, methotrexate, which is often used for rheumatoid arthritis, although it is a old cancer drug. Sulfur, dairy antibodies. Okay, these things will slow it down. Okay, so if your patient is got rheumatoid arthritis and is taking methotrexate, one of the things you want to look at is their folate pathway. When it gets down to 5,10-methylene tetrahydrofolate, it goes past methylene tetrahydrofolate reductase to create 5,10-methylene tetrahydrofolate, or 5-methylfolate, the active form. Okay, things that you need are B2 and B3, which is FAD and NAD. Okay, things that'll slow it down are SAMe, cell danger responses, which that could be a whole nother lecture, reactive oxygen species, DHF, and sulfur. Well, and folic acid. DHF, why would that slow it down? Well, look up a little higher, you see DHF being produced. Well, this is a negative feedback. So that if the body, for whatever reason, is producing too much dihydrofolate, okay, it slows it down by slowing down MTHFR. So the polymorphism itself is important, but not as important as the need for the cofactors and other things that may slow down the pathway and not get you the results you're looking for. Just because you see polymorphisms does not mean that person needs, right off the bat, 5-methylfolate. So again, this particular slide, I was just pointing out how it's NAD dependent and the factors that will decrease and increase enzymatic reactions. So if you didn't catch me on the last slide, this is a little better one. Okay, the methionine cycle, which is the main feature that recycles homocysteine back to SAMe. SAMe is the primary methyl donor, and in numerous biochemical processes in the body, and is critically important that methionine cycle functions properly. Okay, it's dysfunction. If it's dysfunctional, methylation becomes inhibited. Homocysteine levels may increase. This is where the relationship between MTHFR and hyperhomocystinemia actually started way back when. And frankly, it was, I think that the studies that were done found out that that particular relationship wasn't as exact as they'd like. And then all of a sudden, anybody who had anything wrong with them tested for MTHFR, and a lot of people have polymorphisms, but they blamed MTHFR on actually causing different things, which is not true. But it's still out there on the internet. You can look up, MTHFR C67717, come up with lists of things that MTHFR causes. But we know that not to be true. It has to be a combination of things plus environmental input. So the inhibition of SAMe production or utilization will give you significant biochemical disturbances, and evaluating the methionine cycle gives you an idea of what's going on in the body, not only how it produces SAMe, but also how it utilizes it. Included in this cycle is the production of methylcobalamin. So when you look at this, look at the left-hand side of the circle. I'm sorry, it's a little bit fuzzy. Okay, this is MTR and to MTR. This is where the cobalamins enter, and it goes MTR, cobalamin 1, cobalamin 2 to MTRR to create methylcobalamin. Well, we see that MTRR is red or homozygous, but does that mean that this person's going to need methylcobalamin? Well, maybe, but what's more important? Well, do they have enough SAMe? Do they have enough B2, B3? Okay, do they have enough zinc? And what is going to slow down MTR? Nitrous oxide, lead, mercury, hydrogen peroxide, acetaldehyde from yeast, nitrous oxide because he likes repeating himself. Okay, TNF alpha, cadmium, aluminum, copper, alcohol. These are more important. These are more significant in slowing down the production of methylcobalamin. By the way, if you take methylcobalamin, adenosylcobalamin, hydroxycobalamin by mouth and it hits your stomach, okay, it deconjugates and you get whatever the carrier ion is, methyl, adenosyl, okay, and the cobalamin ion. And the cobalamin is what goes through here, okay? So not everybody in the world needs methylcobalamin. Why do I keep harping on this? Because about 80% of the people who take methyl groups have nasty reactions, okay? And very, very quickly, There's no way of telling. I don't care who says what, where, why, and how. There's no way of telling. So if you're going to use methylcobalamin or methylfolate or whatever it is, trial it. Start with a quarter dose, work your way up. You're going to get 1 of 4 reactions as you work your way up on the doses. 1, you're going to get an immediate bad reaction, in which case you should stop. 2, you work your way up in doses, quarter dose, half dose, full dose, over a period of a couple of weeks, but you feel okay, but after a couple of weeks you don't feel so hot. That means you're blocking up other pathways, okay? The third reaction is you start getting, you start building up, you feel better as it builds up, you continue to feel better. Okay, you hit the nail on the head. Those are the miraculous cases you've heard of. And the fourth scenario is, you start with quarter doses, you build your way up, okay, and nothing happens. Okay, it doesn't mean that this is not working. All it means is that the body's accepting the methyl groups of the methyl vitamin that you're giving them, but it's not the answer to whatever symptoms they're having. It's a simple logic, okay? And I won't tell you my logic joke. In this pathway planner and then strategene, the other polymorphisms are not very well studied. They're not in here. That's why you don't see anything like green or yellow, whatever. So what I want you to do is look at the purples, okay, and what things will affect various parts of the pathway, okay? And you might want to spend a little time on this because this is going to give you a good idea of, if somebody has hepatitis or if they have lipopolysaccharides, exactly where it's going to affect their bodies. BHMT, okay, we all know to be sideways creator of homocysteine, is also an indicator that the person may hold their stress internally. There aren't too many studies about it, but it's something we see in practice a lot. So if you see somebody who's got BHMTs like this, okay, I want you to think that they might be internalizing their stress. And here's another clinical pearl for you. People like this tend to have chronic dysthymia. Okay, I probably pronounced that incorrectly. Dysthymia, or chronic low-level depression. Should that person enter into a situation of PTSD, lots of times talk therapy won't help them. Okay, now the person who's coming to you has probably had a ton of therapy, and they have a PTSD situation, whether it's from war, whether it's from rape, whether it's from chronic abuse as a child, or whatever it happens to be. I suggest you think about things like EMDR, eye movement desensitization, EFT, emotional freedom technique. Okay, those plus something called transformational healing, those tend to work a lot better with these type of individuals, and this is the hint. Okay, so just try it or think about it. Okay, I wish I could give you studies, but there aren't any. Okay, this is the methylation profile from doctor's data. The website's on the bottom, which is showing methionine, cysteine, SAM-SAW, adenosine, homocysteine, cystathione, and the SAM-SAW ratio. Okay, they gave you a partial pathway here and the results. Now remember that SAM, which is adenosylmethionine, is the main methyl donor for methylation of RNA, DNA, and so forth. Okay, SAW, SAH, S-adenosyl homocysteine, inhibits the action of SAM. Okay, so a low ratio of SAM to SAW indicates undermethylation. Here you're seeing low cystathione, cysteine, which would portend low glutathione because that's downstream of that. Okay, but you can get an idea of what's being produced and correlate it with the polymorphisms, or at least know if they're not producing it, what cofactors you should be giving them. And that's why I have the green arrows pointing. Because sometimes you'll know what, if they don't have enough homocysteine, or if they don't have enough cystathione, if they don't have enough whatever, you know what cofactors to give them, and you'll know what's needed. So RNA, DNA, protein membrane, phospholipid, creatinine, okay, what this thing is going to do, what you might have to fix. And you know what the most underrated and most ignored part of healing a cell is? Cell wall integrity. Okay, we tend to look at everything else but the cell wall, and it's really important that we look at the cell walls because it's not just a wall, it's a functional unit with receptors. It allows things into the cells, it throws things out of the cells. It is what allows the cell to work, and cell wall integrity problems, leaky cells, are rampant from chronic inflammation, chronic histamine, too much histamine, and so forth, and we are very bad at treating it. So that's one of the considerations you should throw in there. The transsulfuration pathway. There's a lot of reasons for glutathione depletion, remembering that glutathione is our master antioxidant, antitoxicant. Okay, and frankly, stress, pollution, drugs, radiation, poor diet, I think you already know, but that's what will cause glutathione loss through oxidative stress. This is the transsulfuration pathway, and it's a big pathway. So let me tell you that let's pay attention to the creation of glutathione and the recycling of glutathione, because those are the areas that are going to affect your patient most. The top part of the pathway, CBS, the CTH, GCL, the GSS, that is the creation of glutathione. I have the polymorphisms on the right-hand side. Okay, how do you know this is a problem? Okay, whether they have polymorphisms there or not, okay, you should look and ask them how they do with high sulfur sources. Okay, a high sulfur source is not, a spinach salad. It is literally juicing. So if I go to your house and ask you for a glass of fresh squeezed orange juice, you're going to slice up 6 oranges, okay, squeeze them out, hand me the juice. Well, I'm drinking everything but the pits and the rind of 6 oranges. I would never sit down and eat 6 oranges. Well, I might, but I usually wouldn't. So if I hand you, like, if we have a spinach salad together, what's in the spinach? Water, chlorophyll, fiber, a little bit of sulfur. But if I ask you to give me a glass of spinach juice, how much spinach are you going to have to put in that juicer to give me a glass of juice? That's a high sulfur source. Okay, and what symptoms would you expect? Well, brain fog, okay, ammonia-like smell in the urine, general malaise will give you a good idea that that part of the pathway is not working. Also, I wanted you to pay attention to the purple over by GCL. Okay, TGF-beta 1, mycotoxins, big time, infections like HIV, alcohol, uremia, high glutathione are all going to slow this down. Okay, and when you're looking at an organic acid test, the line 59, the hydroxybutyric, represents the reduced glutathione. In the bottom part of the pathway, okay, where glutathione is created, GSH, and oxidizes when it does its work, the body has put in a recycling pathway so that oxidized glutathione can become reduced or active glutathione again. The clues that this may not work, you look at SOD, look at GPX, GST, G6PD. Okay, this is a NAD-dependent pathway. Okay, and the possible clues that this might be a problem is generally low ATP studies, ME, chronic fatigue. But if you gave them liposomal glutathione, for instance, and they feel good for a day or two, but yet they feel bad after that, okay, guess what? That recycling pathway is not working. And why is that recycling pathway important? One way of determining if you have too much oxidized glutathione is to look at the ratio between the pyroglutamic and the hydroxybutyric. If you determine that the oxidized glutathione is too high, what that's going to do is block mitochondrial function in a way that I'll show you in a moment. But should you see that, here's some treatment hints. There's a product called Optimal Liposomal Glutathione Plus, which has glutathione plus the factors that you need to run this pathway. Or you can use liposomal glutathione and acetylglutathione or any form that you're comfortable with. And there's a CoQ10 patch from patchmd.com. That's a transdermal patch that has ubiquinol. It has PQQ, D-ribose, and every other thing that you need to run not only this pathway, and has a significant amount of NAD also, but it gives you enough to run the mitochondrial pathway also. So that can be a good way. Often what I'll do when I determine that someone has got too much oxidized glutathione and not enough reduced glutathione, I'll treat them, let's say, with a CoQ10 patch or ubiquinol with PQQ or something for a couple of weeks. I make sure that there's a good level of NAD in whatever I'm doing. I like the transdermal patches because they get right into the bloodstream before I even start using glutathione. About 8 years ago, it was discovered that high levels of oxidized glutathione will actually prevent or slow down the entry of the electron donors in the first complex of the mitochondria. This is especially true if there are polymorphisms at the first complex, which is the NDUFS SNP. So if you have a genetic test that shows significant polymorphisms at NDUFS, and you have evidence that the oxidized glutathione is quite high, you're going to be able to fix that person basically by fixing the glutathione pathway, not by slamming away at the mitochondria. That's the way it's often done. By the way, just so you know, complex 1 is NDUFS, complex 3 is UQCRC2, complex 4 is COX, and complex 5 is ATP synthase. And on some of the tests, you can see the polymorphisms for each. But the one that's most important is the very first. For neurotransmitters, okay, we look at the biopterin pathway. And this is the biopterin pathway. Okay, this is my biopterin pathway. And one way to look at this very simply is look at tyrosine. Okay, notice that you need BH4 and iron for it to become L-dopa, then dopamine. And then it goes past dopamine beta hydroxylase to become norepinephrine, then epinephrine, and then on down. Remember that often you're testing metabolites. So look at dopamine, look off to the right, look at HVA, okay, look at the very bottom of VMA. Often these are the things that are tested instead of the actual neurotransmitter themselves. And given that, remember that these numbers that you're going to get on the metabolites are affected by the presence or absence of FAD, NAD, B1, SAMe, and so forth. So you have to use the clinical correlation when you're making an assessment. But this person would have a tendency towards high excitation, okay, just by looking at it. Look at tryptophan, okay, should become 5-hydroxytryptophan and then work its way down to serotonin and hopefully melatonin. Again, you often measure the 5-HIAA. That's fairly straightforward. So if the 5-HIAA is low, generally speaking, the serotonin is low, and you need to ask yourself, why is the serotonin low? We'll go back to tryptophan. Okay, go to the left, and you see IDO, and you see a bunch of orange writing, INF gamma, LPS, lipopolysaccharide stress, TNF alpha. Under conditions of inflammation, IDO will get upregulated and it starts looking for substrate. So it starts pulling tryptophan out of the pathway to create kyurenic acid, which isn't too bad, but eventually creates quinolinic acid, which is a heck of an excitotoxin. So the indicator that the serotonin is low via the 5-HIAA might be an indicator that there are a lot of microbial problems that are pulling tryptophan out of the pathway. It's called tryptophan steal or tryptophan shunt. It also creates NAD, but I don't think that's a good way for the body to create NAD. Okay, it just isn't. So how can you measure this? Okay, like I said, you can use the organic acid test. This is from Great Plains Laboratory, and you're measuring the HVA and VMA. Okay, and remember that in this case, the HVA representing the dopamine metabolite is much higher than the VMA. That to me would indicate that dopamine beta hydroxylase is not working very well. You see that up on the left-hand side. Okay, the tryptophan metabolite is a bit on the lower side. That's the 5-HIAA. But the good thing is that the quinolinic and kyurenic acids are on the low side also. So we're probably dealing more with what's stimulating the pathway rather than a microbial problem right here. Glutamate can also cause excitation, and you see that with the GAD enzymes, which is glutamate decarboxylase. Okay, you need B6 for that particular reaction to work, and often if you give somebody glutamine for leaky gut and they actually get worse, they get more excitable, it's because of this. So you can give them B6 or simply not use glutamine and use something else to help heal the gut. Okay, glutamine creates glutamate and has to go to GABA. Okay, if you have too much glutamate, that's a heck of an excitatory neurotransmitter. High levels of glutamate have been known to cause seizures. For those of you who like studies, okay, this is the association between GAD and anxiety disorders, major depression, and neuroticism. Okay, it's a really good study. Basically says that your GAD enzymes have to be working for GABA to be created. GABA, by the way, is what every mammalian brain uses to calm itself down. Another way of looking at neurotransmitters is by using urinary neurotransmitter testing. And before everybody goes jumping out of their seats, yes, I know it is not only CNS. Everything you test, whether it's serum, platelets, urine, is not going to be totally CNS. The only way you can get that is by doing a lumbar puncture and getting cerebral spinal fluid. Okay, what you're looking at, remember, are biomarkers, not exactitudes, but biomarkers. You correlate these with the person's clinical condition. And the clinical utility of urinary neurotransmitters has been very well studied and very well correlated to various symptoms. So you can use this not as exactitudes, it's like metabolites. You can't use them as exactitudes. You can use them as biomarkers. Okay, so in this particular case, the serotonin is quite low, the dopamine's on the lower side, the norepinephrine's on the lower side, epinephrine's quite high, glutamate is on the low side, GABA's in the normal limits, glycine is low, histamine is quite high, and phenylethylamine is quite high. This person has most probably a late stage 2, stage 3 adrenal fatigue. This person's wired but tired. Okay, this person is really in a lot of trouble. Okay, the histamine is the hint on where you want to start treating and start looking for something to treat. Phenylethylamine being that high, phenylethylamine is normally used in the body as what you need to focus with norepinephrine, but when it's that high, it's a reflection of excitation. The doctor's data uses neurobiogenic amines. You can get this in urine. You can also get it in blood, but like I said, it's going to be the same thing. Okay, it gives it to you on a scale. On this particular person, the dopamine, epinephrine, norepinephrine are very low. The serotonin's on the high side. That can be from an SSRI, or it can be from the use of 5-HTP. The histamine is on the higher side. GABA, glutamate's low, glycine's low, phenylethylamine is quite high. Okay, again, this person is going to be wired but tired, and this indicates chronicity in my mind. Okay, it tells me that this person's dopamine, epinephrine, everything they need to get their body up and moving is very, very low. They've probably been over-treated with serotonin, and the reason for the histamine really hasn't been addressed. Again, I'm just guessing just by looking at it. Remember that histamine destroys the cell wall, okay, and the cell wall is a phospholipid bilayer. Look at everything that is associated with the cell wall. I know you already know this, but let's remind ourselves that the cell wall is one of the most important things that you could be considering and that should be fixed. And often it's just a matter of giving the person phospholipids that they can absorb. Remember, it's absorption. You can give somebody sunflower lecithin, but that doesn't mean they're going to absorb it through the gut. You have to think about how it's being delivered and is it going to be absorbed in the body. Okay? This is the histamine pathway on Strategene. Just by staring at it, you can see, there must be problems. To the left-hand side, you're looking at the extracellular histamine conjugation, which is done through a diamine oxidase. In the middle and right-hand side is the intracellular conjugation, which uses HTC, HNMT, several others, MAOB, NAT. And you can say to yourself here that, well, this person may have difficulty conjugating histamine both ways. By the way, the cofactor for HNMT is SAMe, even though SAW will block it. Okay, you do need B1, B2, B3, NAD, but SAMe is the main thing. Okay. On other tests, you'll see actually the DAO polymorphisms, okay, which you see on the left-hand side with the green lightning bolt. Okay, on the right-hand side, you'll see polymorphisms at HTC, HNMT, HRH, which does not mean Her Royal Highness. Okay, HTR, those are the intracellular histamine conjugators. By the way, the cannabinoid receptors are there also. The CNR1 has to do mainly with THC, where the CNR2 has to do with CBD. I know that CBD is being now promulgated a lot in the UK, and it's a great anti-inflammatory. You should look into it. So if you suspect mostly extracellular histamine problems and you want to help the body, you can supplement with diamine oxidase, but I want you to be careful because several years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, there's only one company that makes diamine oxidase and everybody buys from them, okay? And then they sell it under their own labels. And that company decided that it was going to slow down or stop production. So a lot of the companies that sell histamine, breakdown products change their formulations without telling anybody. And believe me when I tell you, that was crazy. So if you're going to give somebody diamine oxidase, do a little bit of research first. What you should be looking for is actually diamine oxidase with either 10,000 or 20,000 HDUs. I don't know what HDU means, but I think of it as histamine destruction units. I know that histamine block from Seeking Health is a good product, and Dowson, which is sourced out of Germany, is a good product. Intracellular, mainly SAMe, and of course you want to put in B6, B1, B2, B3, vitamin C. Just interesting how if you just give the body this stuff, things will just start working. And always, always, always treat leaky gut syndrome. Okay, I don't care what the testing says. If you have a chronic illness, you've got leaky gut. And when you have leaky gut, you're going to start getting inflammation. The first thing you usually see is food allergies or food intolerances. And then you're going to start seeing autoimmunity, and then sometimes dysautonomia. And then when you start getting to that area, you can almost assume a blood-brain barrier breach. Okay, so leaky gut is not just a euphemism. It's one of the main things that causes chronic inflammatory response syndrome. And that chronic inflammation, trust me, is what all your patients are suffering from. Okay, so anybody with a chronic illness has leaky gut, and I don't care what the zonulin test says. I don't care what any other test says. Okay, if you just listen to them, you're going to find out there's evidence of leaky gut. So general treatment guidelines. You want to decrease the amount of antigens that they're exposed to, so use digestive enzymes. That breaks down the foods completely, not to small chain polypeptide bonds. Provide for the replenishment of the mucus layer via the use of demulcent herbs or something similar. Provide for the replication of GI cells, okay, things like colostrum, serum-derived bovine immunoglobulin isolates, glutamine. There's loads of different ways of going about it, but make sure you provide for it. And then provide for the reestablishment of the microbiome, always remembering that 3 to 5 pounds of biota is what runs your DNA expression. I treat a lot of people, and obviously the people that I treat are the ones that have failed elsewhere. Okay, and it amazes me that when they feel like they've treated leaky gut, and I ask them what they've done, and I look at the various treatment plans, one of these things is not there. And I think we should all just get together and agree that these particular principles should be followed, and we should target leaky gut and provide for it, because that's what's going to knock down inflammation. If you prevent antigenic entry into the lamina propria, the basement membrane, then you're not going to evoke those memory cells, whether they're memory B or memory T, it doesn't matter. Okay, you're not going to evoke them, and if you're not going to evoke their response, then inflammation is going to drop like a rock. I've shown it time and time again. So go to the basics. Okay, and this is when testing lies. Okay, everybody wants to test. Drives me crazy. Okay, but this is how you can tell that the test is lying to you. Okay, I can think of other ways of saying it, but if the test doesn't make sense, like one parameter is out of line. So you're looking at a regular blood test and the blood glucose is 10 times normal, but everything else looks great. And the patient doesn't look like they have diabetes, they don't have polyuria, polydipsia, polyphagia. Guess what? That's a lab error. Don't go crazy, okay? The test finding doesn't correlate with the clinical symptoms, okay? Makes you wonder if the test is accurate. Remember, these tests are done by reagents and so forth. Reagents can get low. Don't just trust the test blindly, okay? Your intuitive insight says there's another reason for what is going on aside from what you're looking at that test, okay? This is especially true when treating children. If you can't find it in yourself to use your intuitive insight, ask the mother. A mother's intuition, a mom's intuition, is the most accurate information in the universe. But let me share with you something that has worked for me very, very well. You must give the mother permission to use her intuition. And that starts right when you're taking the history. When they say, this happened, but, they're essentially saying, I can't prove it. And you have to tell them, look, tell me what you feel. Tell me what your intuitive sense says, because that's more accurate than any of those tests. By the time it comes to when you have to make decisions, the mother's intuition is going to guide you. Okay, and you're going to look great. You're going to look brilliant. You're going to look like the greatest clinician in the world because, number one, you listened and you gathered the information correctly. So always remember, once you eliminate the impossible, whatever's left, whatever remains, no matter how improbable, must be the truth. I want to thank you for listening. Just remember, people, a good physician treats the disease. The great physician treats the patient who has the disease. And I truly appreciate this opportunity to share my knowledge with you. If anybody has questions, I don't know exactly how that would work, but you're certainly free to email me through my my website at drjessarmine.com. Take care. I look forward to hopefully working with you some more.